In the Middle Ages, survival was not an abstract idea. It was measured in handfuls of grain, in the strength of your ox, in the timing of the rain, and in the narrow strip of earth you called your own. For many peasants across medieval Europe, life revolved around a small parcel of land, sometimes as little as 1 acre. That single acre was not merely property. It was pantry, workplace, inheritance, and lifeline. If it thrived, the family endured. If it failed, hunger followed swiftly. An acre may not sound like much to modern ears. Roughly the size of a football field, it could seem impossibly small to sustain an entire household. Yet medieval peasants had little choice. Land was controlled by lords under the feudal system, and most families worked strips allocated within an open field arrangement. These strips were scattered across large communal fields, and even if a family effectively had access to more than 1 acre, each individual strip might be narrow and fragmented. For the poorest families, a single acre or less represented their only reliable source of food. Every year began with the rhythm of the agricultural calendar. Survival demanded discipline and memory. The plowing season arrived early in the spring, when the ground softened enough to break. In wealthier villages, a family might share access to an ox team. In poorer households, the father and older sons sometimes pulled a light plow themselves, straining against the soil. The act of plowing was not merely preparation, it was a gamble. The depth had to be just right. Too shallow, and weeds would choke the crop. Too deep, and precious energy would be wasted. Most peasants planted hardy grains such as rye, barley, or oats. Wheat was desirable but difficult. It demanded better soil and better luck. On a single acre, a family could not afford variety without careful planning. Many practiced a simple form of crop rotation. One portion of the land might lie fallow to recover nutrients, while the rest bore crops. But if the acre was truly the family's only plot, letting part of it rest meant sacrificing precious calories. Hunger often dictated short-term survival over long-term soil health. The yield from 1 acre varied widely depending on region and weather. In good years, medieval yields were modest by modern standards, perhaps 3 or 4 grains harvested for every 1 planted. That ratio had to feed the family and provide seed for the next year. A bad harvest could cut that yield in half. Rain at the wrong time could rot crops. Drought could wither them before harvest. Early frost could undo months of labor overnight. Survival depended as much on the sky as on the soil. Grain formed the backbone of the medieval diet. Once harvested with sickles and bundled into sheaves, it was threshed by hand to separate kernels from stalks. The grain would be ground into coarse flour and baked into dark bread. This bread was dense and heavy, sometimes mixed with beans or peas to stretch supplies. For a family living on 1 acre, bread was not a side dish, it was the meal itself.
Yet grain alone could not sustain health. Families often supplemented their acre with a small garden plot near their cottage. Cabbages, onions, leeks, beans, and turnips were common staples. These vegetables were resilient and could survive colder climates. A cabbage patch might seem humble, but it offered essential nutrients missing from grain-heavy diets. In times of scarcity, boiled cabbage and a crust of bread could mean the difference between endurance and collapse. If the family possessed even a single animal, their chances improved dramatically. A pig was especially valuable. Pigs could forage in nearby woods, consuming acorns and scraps, converting waste into meat. When slaughtered in late autumn, a pig provided salted pork that could last through winter. Chickens, if kept, offered eggs, small but steady additions of protein. A goat might supply milk. However, maintaining livestock required fodder, and on just 1 acre, feeding animals competed directly with feeding the family. Winter was the true test of survival. From late autumn until the first green shoots of spring, families relied entirely on what they had stored. Grain had to be carefully rationed. Salted meat, if available, was eaten sparingly. Root vegetables stored in cellars sustained them through the cold months. Firewood was another necessity. Without enough fuel, cold could be as deadly as hunger. A harsh winter could deplete stores before the next harvest was ready, leading to the dreaded hungry gap in early spring. Disease lurked constantly. Malnutrition weakened immune systems. A poor harvest followed by illness could wipe out entire households. Medieval people did not understand germ theory, but they understood patterns. They knew that crowded, damp living conditions brought sickness. On a single acre, however, there was little room for comfort. Houses were small, often shared with animals during winter for warmth. Smoke from indoor hearths filled the air. Survival meant tolerating discomfort daily. Taxes and obligations added further strain. Under feudal arrangements, peasants owed labour and produce to their lord. Even if a family harvested enough from their acre to feed themselves, a portion might be claimed as rent or tithe. The church also required a tenth of produce. These deductions could push a family from stability into scarcity. The margin between sufficiency and starvation was razor thin. Community played a crucial role. Though each family worked its own strip, survival was rarely solitary. Neighbours shared tools, oxen, and labour during peak seasons like harvest. If one household suffered misfortune, others sometimes provided aid, though their own resources were limited. Medieval villages functioned as survival networks. Isolation was dangerous. Cooperation increased resilience. Women's labour was central to survival. While men often ploughed and performed heavy field work, women tended gardens, processed food, spun wool, brewed ale, and cared for children. Brewing small ale was particularly important because water could be unsafe. Ale provided hydration and calories. Every task, from mending clothes to preserving vegetables, contributed directly to endurance. Children, too, were part of the survival equation. From an early age, they scared birds from fields, gathered firewood, and helped with planting and harvest. Childhood in the modern sense barely existed. Survival demanded participation from every able body. A family's strength lay in numbers, but more mouths also meant greater demand on the acre's yield. Weather remained the ultimate authority. The medieval warm period brought relatively stable conditions for a time, allowing populations to grow. But later, the onset of what historians call the Little Ice Age brought cooler temperatures and unpredictable seasons. Repeated crop failures in the early 14th century led to the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. For families living on a single acre, such events were catastrophic. No savings account existed, no government relief arrived. The land either provided or it did not. And yet, resilience defined these communities. Knowledge passed down through generations taught families how to hedge their bets. They might plant different grains to reduce risk. They gathered wild berries and herbs from common lands. They fished in streams, if permitted. Some took seasonal work or crafted goods to trade. Survival was not passive. It required creativity and relentless effort. The emotional landscape of such a life was shaped by uncertainty. Each planting season carried hope. Each harvest carried judgment. Faith often provided comfort. The church calendar structured the year, offering festivals that punctuated hardship with moments of celebration. Even in poverty, music, storytelling, and communal feasts at harvest time reinforced social bonds.
1 acre could sustain a family in a good year, but it rarely provided abundance. Diets were monotonous, protein was scarce, famine was never far away. Yet medieval peasants were not perpetually starving victims. Many years were stable enough to maintain population growth. Archaeological evidence suggests that while life was hard, it was not uniformly miserable. People married, raised children, and formed tight-knit communities. What made survival possible was not the acre alone, but the web of knowledge surrounding it. Timing, cooperation, preservation techniques, and adaptability turned a fragile strip of soil into a viable home. In many ways, survival on 1 acre was a delicate balancing act between nature's unpredictability and human persistence. To imagine standing at the edge of that acre is to understand its weight. Every furrow represented labour. Every seed carried expectation. Every harvest determined whether winter would be endured or feared. There were no guarantees, only effort and faith. Surviving on 1 acre of land in the Middle Ages was neither romantic nor entirely bleak. It was a life of constant negotiation with the earth. The acre was teacher, tyrant, and provider all at once. It demanded sweat and offered sustenance. It punished neglect and rewarded care. And for millions across centuries, that small patch of ground was enough. Just enough to keep hunger at bay and hope alive for another season.